Good afternoon, good evening, and everyone out there. Thanks. Ooh, my phone is going off. Sorry about that. How's everyone doing tonight? How are you doing, Lisa? Can you hear
I'm
me
doing
okay?
great.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Yes. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the CyberGangsters Cybersecurity YouTube channel. And here I have it's real funny. So I started this off just kind of see myself where growing, how I'm growing in my understanding of PCI. And so I recorded a bunch of videos just here in the office, and it was like I'm going to use these so later on I can watch and see how much my understanding and knowledge of PCI has grown. And
Right.
so then I got the idea. I was like, you know what? I'd still like to learn from those who can teach it. And if you've been here for any amount of time, you've seen that we've had a guest, Peggy Nolan from Payment Card Assessors, come on, and she's talked. And today we have the other half of Payment Card Assessments, and this is Lisa Cressey. Lisa, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm glad that you guys asked me to come on. It's this whole thing is more Peggy's thing. I always say that to Peggy. This is kind of your thing because she likes to do the training and everything. But I like to when it's something that I'm passionate about, I like to get on and talk about it too. So, and I'm
Yeah,
passionate about continuous compliance.
and we are definitely passionate about learning. Janae, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Janae. I am getting into the PCI world, and so I'm super excited about learning and meeting other people um, in that area. I guess I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I'm a mom. I homeschool my daughter, and I'm into PCI. So
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, it's Lisa. It's funny that you say that Peggy is more into it, right? And I appreciate when, just like I was stating earlier, if we can find people who can teach us more and contribute into this realm.
Yeah.
I found one of the challenging things when I was starting to learn about PCI was there just wasn't enough content out there in terms of like video format, right? I found a lot of information that was either very old or there was some out there, but just not enough, you
Right.
know? And so I appreciate you coming on here and helping contribute to the community so that others can learn and just pick up stuff that they don't know. And so, with that being said, you were going to come, or not were, you are coming on here today to talk to us about something specific. Before we get into that, though, I kind of want to do just a little icebreaker here, right? Um, so maybe I thought it'd be kind of cool if we could go around real quick and just share something interesting in terms. So I'm a food guy. I love food, and I think everyone enjoys it. So I thought it'd be fun to hear just what your most interesting or favorite dessert dish out there is. So why don't I'll start, and then we'll go to you, Janae, and then Lisa we'll end with you. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So for me, I am a hardcore sucker for a chocolate chip cookie. I know it's a very vanilla flavor or whatever you want to say, but chocolate chip cookies are my jam. I love it. Every time there's some around, I cannot just help but gravitate to it and be like, is it supposed to be one? Because I feel like a chocolate chip cookie is like a Lay's potato chip, and you can never just have one. So I'm going to say for me, a chocolate chip cookie. Janae, what about you?
I just can't pick one. So I'm really loving. I shouldn't even say this because they're hard to find at the store, but I'm loving the Snickers crunchy peanut butter candy bars. They've been my go-to for like a year now. It's pretty bad. But I also love some gelato. I've been really into that. Some chocolate gelato, and I love a good cowboy cookie too. So
Oh, okay. Good choices. Good choices there. And Lisa, what about you?
Yeah, well, for me, I'm not saying I don't like sweets because I love candy, and all the candy that Janae just talked about is on top of my list, especially payday bars. But from a dessert perspective, it has to have fruit in it because I'm a big fruit person. And so for me, I think if I was out at a restaurant, I'd be looking for a key lime pie, a lemon meringue, something tart.
Those are great choices. Man, those are great choices.
I'm a fruit girl too. Like, I love watermelon so much that when I was growing up, I said, I'm marrying a man with the last name Watermelon. I didn't, but I settled for Burkhart, but
Oh, that's close second. That's a
it's
good.
kind of close.
Yeah. There's a fun drink I've seen online making the rounds, and it involves when you mix watermelon and what is it? Condensed milk and one other ingredient. And so when you blend all that together, it turns into what we call an agua fresca. And so it's when you turn a fruit drink into like a milky drink, a sweet milk drink. And it tastes good. So be careful for that.
I don't know.
It doesn't sound like it goes together, but it works.
I love watermelon.
Fantastic. It does.
I'm with you, Lisa. I'll keep it plain with some salt.
And I know we could keep going, but we really came here today because we wanted to talk about things that are related to PCI, right? And compliancy. And so with that, Peggy, if any of you watched last week's episode, Peggy mentioned something that really caught our attention, especially Janae. It really sparked her to know more about that. And so Lisa was willing to come on and talk to us about that and tell us about it. So if you have questions as we go through today's interview, make sure to ask them wherever you're watching from. And we will make sure to pop those questions on the screen close to when Lisa's speaking. So that way we can make sure we associate the question with that. And so they'll be just on the screen like this. Darian, thanks for joining in and hopping in, man. Appreciate it. And with that being said, Lisa, go ahead and tell us about what was that term that Janae had caught last week?
Continuous compliance was the term. So just a little bit about me before we get going here. I'm a native in New Hampshire. I moved to Florida about 10 years ago, and now I'm in South Carolina to be closer to my daughter. But I worked at the same Fortune 100 company for 40 years. It spanned, I would say probably 15 years of it was on the business side. I was in auditing, I was in underwriting. And then the last half of my career there, it was all IT. So I have a strong IT security background. And I've held dozens of certifications, anywhere from writing to, development certifications. And I also have my system. So just so that you know. So continuous compliance. So before we get into what continuous compliance means, let's talk about what a PCI compliance program really is. Because last week we kind of talked about what's a program and what's a project. Peggy did last week anyways. But anyways, so the compliance program is really a set of audit controls designed by an organization that helps them capture activities and ensure that they're conducting those processes in a manner that would be compliant with a regulatory group like PCI DSS. Okay. So my question for everybody, if you weren't aware of what, a compliance program was supposed to consist of, why do you think they call it an assessment and not an audit if we use audit controls? Does anybody get any words of wisdom about that or thoughts about why they call it an assessment?
Go ahead, Janae.
Go ahead.
My first thought is an audit. It makes me think of, just top of my head, like a checkbox. Yes or no, going down the box. Assessment makes me think more validation, more not so much as checkbox, but that would be the end result of some sort of checkbox. But there's got to be some like interviews, like researching, like verifying, and then being able to tell a story that equals yes or no.
Yeah, that's very close.
I feel like an assessment's more of a test. It's testing to make sure that the compliance program is working, I guess. That's how I kind of see assessment.
And that's kind of close too. Well, so the basic definition of an audit is an examination of results to verify their accuracy. So an audit is performed by someone other than those people responsible for producing the results. So that's what an audit is. An assessment goes further than that. An assessment, the assessor, when they're looking at the evidence and the artifacts and, the whole thing within PCI assessment. They're trying to determine actions that might be necessary to make an organization compliant if they're not compliant. So they make a judgment based on what your processes are. And then they will make suggestions and guide you to become compliant. So those are the kind of differences between an audit. An audit is, this control failed, black and white. But with the assessment, they're looking at that from an audit perspective, but they're also looking at it from, as an assessor, I have to help them determine what's the best way to get them compliant. Auditors don't do that. So, yeah. And what's interesting is that back when version 1.1 came out, the DSS was actually called PCI DSS Security Audit Procedures. And then in version 1.2, they changed it to PCI DSS Requirements and Security Assessment Procedures. So they changed it in 1.2 to an assessment. So, so based on those definitions, I'm just going to throw this up to the people on the phone. They don't have to answer. Just kind of think about it while I'm going along here. Is how many people today are responsible for completing a SAC? Doesn't matter what SAC. And if you are completing a SAC, are you following the definition of an assessment? Because a SAC is a self-assessment. Mm-hmm. A SAC is not just an audit where you check off the box. So think about that. And then in the audit control world, there are 3 types of controls: detective, corrective, and preventative are the 3.
Detective, corrective, and preventative.
Yes. So your typical PCI compliance program uses 2 of these. They detect and they correct, basically, is what they're doing. But with a continuous compliance program, you throw in the preventative. So you're trying to do all 3. Okay. So let's talk about the next thing to talk about. Any questions? You can ask anything you want anytime. So the next thing to talk about is compliance misconceptions.
Oh,
Lisa, can I ask you real quick, actually, before we go on that? Tell me what the difference is between detective, corrective, and I can't remember what you said the third one was.
Preventative.
Thank you, Janae.
Yes. Detect. I have to look at my notes. Detect, correct, and prevent. So the detecting is that you have systems in place that are detecting control failures, like the config is out of the config setting is not set to the correct control the way it's supposed to be. So those are the tools that they use to detect. So most of your technologies really have some type of a detection part to it.
Yeah.
Like your firewalls will feed data into the back end of different firewall rules that they have. And then most firewall teams will have some type of way to detect firewall rules that haven't been used in 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. So that's the detecting. Okay. And then the corrective is you fixing your remediation efforts. So you're correct. So you fail, you correct, you fail, you correct, you fail, you correct. Okay. So the preventative is you set up a program that is constantly monitoring all of your controls so that if it detects and you prevent, it's just like it's a rinse and repeat type of a thing. Okay. So
like reset.
Yeah, it's a reset type of a thing, but you're doing it before it becomes non-compliant. Like I always said in PCI to people that I worked with, you have a control failure. Everybody automatically thinks, oh, I'm not compliant. Well, that's not what that means, because all control failures have a remediation schedule. And as long as that remediation schedule aligns with what the DSS says you're allowed, how much time you're allowed to get that fixed, you're not really non-compliant.
Right.
That's in a remediation cycle. So the problem is that if you're not continuously monitoring all of these controls, you're not fixing these failures in that allotted time. So
you're just doing a Band-Aid situation.
Yeah. Just a Band-Aid.
And you're putting all that energy, all that effort, all that money into literally patching this up for the moment. But then at some point in the future, you're going to have to redo that all again.
Yes. Yeah. So when it comes time for that ROC, or when you're signing that SOC at the, during your assessment cycle, you're spending most of your time making sure that things got fixed that failed before, So you're always looking behind, you're never looking forward.
Yeah. So and that's interesting because like you mentioned audit earlier, when you have, the check boxes, this isn't what you're talking about. It's not leading to these check boxes. It's the work that you have to make sure is being done.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Cause when in my former company, we used to have internal audit, we used to have SOC compliance come in, we would have attestation compliance come in, right? All of those, PCI is unique because with PCI, when they come in to do your assessment or you're doing your SAC, right? If you fail, you fail. You don't get a pass. They say on the ROC, oh, you failed. You can't get a signed report on compliance because you failed. With all of those other regulatory groups, you can fail, but then they have a finding. And that finding goes before the organization. And the organization says, oh, I think we can fix that in the next 120 days. And they'll still get their write-up, their report. And the report will say, oh, it failed this, but they're going to fix this.
It's kind of like a graduate who walks the stage but hasn't finished all their credits or classes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, we used to always Peggy and I would sit there and just shake our heads, when it came time, when they were talking about it at the big meetings. They'd be like, oh yeah, we have 8 critical findings. And I'm like, wow, we never.
So it's like in that scenario, all the findings are done post assessment or however we want to say that. But in PCI, that has to all be done pre.
Yes. Yeah. So you have to have all your ducks in a row before you get the assessment starts up. And like you said, in all the other ones, they come in and they do it and they find things. You don't want people finding. You don't want your assessors finding anything wrong.
Right.
So, okay. So let's talk about the misconceptions. Biggest one I always hear is that I passed my report on compliance, right? So I'm good to go for a year, right? I don't have to worry about this until next year. That's not true. Merchants are required to maintain compliance by executing a variety of day-to-day processes. So just because, and Peggy and I used to get, way back in the beginning, we would get so ticked off at people because they knew we were getting sampled for the audit. Well, this is before we stood up our compliance, continuous compliance program. And I was telling Jaime before that I call it sustainability as well, because we sustain compliance. But anyways, they would think, well, we only have to worry about the sample. We don't have to worry about the other 800 systems we have.
Wow.
We're just so in the beginning, when we would when the assessor, the QSA would come in, they would hand us we would hand them the inventory. They would hand us back the sample. We would run all the config reports, the vuln reports, all those reports. And if any of our samples showed up in the report, those went to the technology teams to fix these in the next week. That's not the way you run compliance.
Right. I mean, that's an integrity issue too, almost.
Yeah. And that's right. And that's why Peggy talked about integrity.
Yeah.
So and that goes back to saying also, there are requirements that we know of that tell us, you have to have a daily track. You've got to keep track of these logs daily and look at them to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities that have been presented. So that adds credence to what you're saying about your not your assessment, but your vulnerability, your compliancy is not a limited time frame in this period. It is an ongoing. It is continual.
Yeah.
And would you say that the industry overall needs to get that understanding and that they haven't quite grasped it yet, and that's kind of where it becomes hard to, I guess, am I trying to say hard to get everyone to change over to? Because if everyone's looking at it in that way, then that's interesting.
Yeah, it was. Luckily, when I was hired into in my role as the PCI, they call the sustainability program manager, our company had decided they needed to do that. They didn't want to no longer be just compliant on the day the rock is signed and then failing the next day.
Right.
So I was lucky in that respect because they had already determined that they need to do that. They needed to do that. But with 4.0, they're going to be looking at, control failures and how are you maintaining compliance? That's the big gotcha in 4.0 that people, I don't think, are ready for at all.
So that, and I appreciate you talking about that, Lisa, because I think learning new things about PCI in general, I have felt that there have been times where I believe that there was this one-time deal, right? It's like, and this is good because it's clearing up my perception and my prospects even. I thought for the longest time that, man, I'm only going to be good to an organization for 3, 6, 9 months, whatever that determined time frame is going to be. And then after that, I'm twiddling my thumbs for the next however months, or maybe they kind of cut ties with me and then I've got to go find the next organization. And also the belief that I had or have, or getting out of, however you want to say that not everybody who has to comply with PCI is doing their compliancy at the same time either.
Right.
But there very well could be lots of overlap in that. So what I appreciate about the little bit I'm learning so far now is that your compliancy, quote unquote, the time to report on your compliancy may have an end date, but there's still work that has to be done post your assessment, post your turning in of your assessment or compliancy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is continuous. So whether people want to believe it or not, if you talk about controls with frequencies, in the config space alone, in configuration management, they say, oh, your config settings, you can't have any failures. What do we call them? We didn't call them failures.
Gap.
No, we didn't call them a gap either. I'll think of it. It'll come to me. But we had another term for it. So because of that, because of the way that the DSS talks about config failures, if you want to call them that, right? They say you only have to scan for config failures like every, I think it's 60 days. See, Peggy knows more about this. She has the PCI DSS in her back pocket. I don't.
Was it deficiency? Marsha's saying, was it deficiency?
No, we didn't call it that either. I'll think of it. But anyways, say it was, I think it was 60 days back when I first started standing up the program. But the problem is that 60 days is, you're waiting too long to do your scanning. If you're scanning every 60 days, I think it was actually quarterly that they said you had to do the config way back in the beginning. But the problem we ran into was that, they would do their scans once a month, right?
Right.
So the results would come out and it would show that we had 50 criticals, or we had 75 highs, right?
Yes.
Depending on the criticality of that failure, depends on how long you have to fix it. So if you were waiting, I know we were doing it monthly, but people were waiting longer than that. I think it was quarterly. And the second reason why we went to monthly scanning was because if you do a significant change to the environment, you have to do ad hoc scanning.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do the ad hoc scanning because I used to be a change manager as well as part of my profession.
Okay.
So the worst part of change management is trying to fit every change into the environment one time a month, because there's always a change Sunday once a month.
Right.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Sense.
So, and then
everybody's scrambling.
Yeah, and then the other Saturdays and Sundays are for the business to push, code and stuff. So anyways, we got our QSA to agree to a monthly.
Like doing them on Fridays, Lisa?
Huh?
You didn't like doing your changes on Fridays?
Oh no, they wouldn't let us. You couldn't do
know.
anything during the week, and Monday was a no change Monday. It was like ridiculous. I spent that whole career as a change manager working every weekend, but on top of like 24/7 every weekend.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah. And so I forget where I was going with that. But anyways, so if you have a very small window that you can actually do scanning, right?
Yes.
Because of all the other activity.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's and that's interesting, Lisa, because I always tell people, like, I always look at people and I'm like, before I started learning PCI, I was telling folks, I was like, man, it's ridiculous when they have these breaches and you're finding out about them later. I can only imagine. And I was around whenever PCI wasn't even started yet. It was called the Visa MasterCard data, whatever it was. Right. And so I can remember those days when breaches would happen. Right. And they were crazy. And even to today, we still see them. And I always tell people, I'm like, you notice anything weird? It's because it's from the previous quarter at minimum. Right. You usually see it from a previous quarter. It's because the scans and everything that they do and they're checking on.
Yeah.
You know, it tells a story if you know what to look for, if you know how to decipher it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just adds more validity to the idea of this continuous compliancy. Why wait 30, 60, 90 plus days for that information when you could find it out now? Like it sucks, right? It's going to suck at any way you read it. A breach, an exploit that's being taken advantage of. It sucks all the way around. But why add on to it by putting more time in front of it?
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. And speaking of breaches, the risk group, who are the ones who handle all of the breaches that happen, governance and risk group and their former company, they determine what they feel is a breach. Right. So
it's not a publicly defined list of things to say this is a breach. It's whatever they want to say.
That's hard.
Yeah. So during our whole career, anyways, it was, monitoring. We'd find something. If it was something that we felt needed to be escalated to the risk team because somebody needed to open up an LCERT or whatever, we would notify them, and then they would come back. Well, that doesn't fall into our, category of what we feel need, and we'd be like, wow, So anyway, I'll get off that soapbox. But and so then everybody, the other thing is that people think, well, it's fine because if I collect the evidence once a year. When it's time for the rock cycle, then we'll just fix the failures as the auditors find them, as the assessors find them, the QSA, or whoever's doing the assessment. The problem with that is, like I said, controls high frequencies. And a good example of that goes back to what Peggy was, there was a question that somebody brought up last week about if I have a Q1, ASV scans have to be done every quarter. And you have to have 4 quarters of passing ASV scans. Oh. So if you pass in Q1 and you fail in Q2 and you pass in Q3 and you pass in Q4, you are still non-compliant because you still had failures in Q2 that you didn't remediate. Even though they passed in Q3 and Q4, they still were failing, and we don't know for how many days. So that's why I said you have to, and then I think that
makes sense then.
So that goes along with, you need to be monitoring, you need to be assessing the evidence that's coming in continuously, like your quarterly ASV scans. You should be looking at them when they deliver to you. You shouldn't wait and collect them at the time of the rock. If you find something, or if they found something, you immediately initiate a project to get them fixed, and then you rescan. And that second scan will show as a pass. So then you get your 4 quarters. So that was a good example of another reason why you shouldn't just think you're going to.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So rescan immediately. Don't wait.
Yes. As soon as they fix it, rescan immediately.
Right after the remediations are implemented. And
Good to know.
that makes sense. And I remember going through that from previous assessments, not as an assessor, but when I had to remediate issues that were brought up on the scans. And then we'd meet the next week and be like, we'd have the scan already run again and be like, okay, now there's either new computers or some of those old computers are still showing up. And
Yeah.
But if you're waiting too long, then what essentially is a 5 computer, remediation right now turns into a 50% of your components needing to be remediated in the next quarter.
Right.
Yeah. It just gets worse. It does. Contrary to popular belief, it does not get better after a scan unless you actually act upon it.
Yeah, take action.
Right. So for the most part, we've been talking about what a normal compliance program should, exist, how you should be running a normal compliance program. So now let's talk about continuous compliance, right? It's a little bit different, because with a continuous compliance program, you're going to develop a control framework that's based on security best practices found in either NIST or ISO or one of those organizations. Okay.
Okay.
And then at our former company, we use NIST. So I'll be talking mostly about the NIST, how we incorporated the NIST framework into ours. And so some of the benefits to having a continuous compliance program, and Peggy and I used to always call it the rinse and repeat program, is that, and I don't want to go down the NIST rabbit hole, because there is a big rabbit hole. But basically, NIST creates the standards, guidelines, and the practices for organizations to better manage and reduce cyber risk security. That's basically what NIST does. So that's why the DSS says follow an organization like NIST or like ISO. And that's why, because they have people, that's all they're doing all day is their mission is to make development and application development like never, so that he can never be hacked. But anyways, that's what their whole goal is. But NIST also owns the National Vulnerability Database, which is called, the initials are NVD. So when you have a vulnerability program at your organization and they're following the NIST, the NVD, NIST has all of the settings that you should be scanning for when you're doing your vuln scans. They also have config ones too, and you should make sure that all your settings align with the NIST framework that they have for that.
So what you're saying is when you build your compliance program or continuous compliance improvement, you build that based off of NIST standards and not like the PCI requirements. Is that correct?
Well, you build it off of the NIST standards, but you also make sure that when it comes time for, I told Peggy, I wished I had given Jaime a copy of this. You actually have, if you look at the process flow, say for the config management team, right? There's a process flow that they have to do for their job. And within that process flow, there should be a call out to what it is that when in that process of theirs, that they collect evidence and how does it meet the requirement. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in another slide. Actually, it's still on this slide, so I guess I can talk about it.
You want me to pull it up or no?
No, it's not on that slide.
Okay.
It's just in front of me, notes in front of me that I have.
Okay.
That I brought it up. So a good example of that is a run book. Right?
A run book.
A run book. So we required all technology teams to have a run book. Okay.
What does that mean?
They also called them, there's another name for it, that the technology teams, but Peggy and I call them run books.
A hardening guide?
Standard, I can't remember. I can't remember what the name was that they used, but we called them run books. It's operating procedures. It's their operating procedures, right?
Okay, like SOP kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, it's an SOP. There you go. So the run book identifies all of their processes and how they implement it, right? So that's what their run book does. If it's a great run book, it'll also include where in the process we're collecting evidence, and this is what it is that we have to collect to meet the requirement. And the benefits of having that is because technology changes, people change, everything changes. Practice, it seems like on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
So one of our biggest problems that we had was, say the firewall guy. Firewall guy's been there 20 years. No, he knows firewall like the back of his hand. He retires and they bring somebody new in, doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
Doesn't know how, doesn't know anything that this other guy did, right?
More specifically within the organization. Like, you remember the old QuickBooks commercial where they're going through and they're like, he knows all the receipts, and it's the wife, and she goes, and they're all right there, and she points to his head.
Yeah.
The idea that it does no good being in there, it has to be in the QuickBooks thing. And so as you're saying that commercial is replaying in my head right now.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. So that
Peggy's here. She says PCI DSS requires entities to follow a framework like NIST or ISO.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peggy.
So when we, the year that we were standing up the sustainability program, the first year that I was there, it was just, gathering our thoughts and what are we going to do? And then the second year was when we started implementing the continuous compliance program. It's not really something that you're going to say, we're going to do it this year. You got to be realistic. And I talk about that later. So when we told the technology SMEs that they all had to come up with run books, that was a 6-month project.
Right.
Because they didn't have them. And, and the QSA wasn't looking for them, all they cared about was that when they had their interview that they could say, they could point to a piece of paper that says, this is what I do, and I'm the administrator, and this is how I log in. It's probably more not as simplistic as that, but at the time,
right.
That's what it felt like, you know what I mean?
Interesting.
So, and as a bonus, I talked about the bonus, bringing on new team members. If you have a standard operating procedure run book that outlines everything, not just what you're doing, but also how you're being compliant, and you stop the constant questioning, like we would get questioned all the time. Well, what did they give you last year? And we would have people who we worked with every year for 10 years who would say, what did I give you last year? And Peggy and I would be like, why are you asking me that?
Mm-hmm. You did it once.
No, you should know what you need to give me. So it really became a great tool for training, but it also showed that it showed our QSA that we were serious about making sure people did what they said they were supposed to be doing. Okay, if you're doing what you say you're doing, then you shouldn't have a failure. If you're doing what you say you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. Like I said, config, they can be doing everything like they say they're doing, but the systems can still fail. But if they have in their process, in their runbooks, if they have a process for notifying, ticketing, alerting, dashboarding, and all of that, and we see it quickly, then we can fix it and we're not failing, So that's where I say you can have a failure, but not be failing and not fail.
So that was a huge undertaking for you guys. Wow. I mean, I can't imagine how long that took, probably at least a few years to get everything.
I would say it was a good 2 years, but then, so standing up the continuous compliance program, I think it was about 2 years, but then we also we piggybacked on that automation because one of the biggest complaints that we had from technology SMEs when we would have, retros to find out how did this go, how did that go, was that they were fatigued. They called it PCI fatigue. We're so sick of PCI. I don't want to hear about PCI. I don't want to do this.
It's when they stop responding to your emails and to your meeting requests and things.
Right.
And
So we went through a whole year of what we call automation, where we met with each one of the technology SMEs and we said, okay, the wireless guy, your technology collects information about all the wireless devices, and it detects if there's a wireless device that's working and it's not on your list, how the whole thing works. So since you've got all that data, build a dashboard and give us access to it so that we can see when something's accessing wirelessly that's not supposed to be. And they're like, wow, that's a great idea.
You're like, duh.
So they did, and it was like one of the best things. It was great because they actually used it
Right.
themselves instead of, because before they didn't have it, so they would just be,
kind of like a Wild
That's
West.
great.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to spin it to where it's going to benefit you too. Like, listen how great this is going to be, and then you get more buy-in probably.
Right.
That's interesting. Okay, good to know.
And I always hear through any of the PCI, like any of the validations or compliance, it always seems to feel about buy-in, right? It's that, and that makes sense. So from my limited understanding so far, is it's not just about auditing from afar kind of situation, but you need active participants to actually do this, because it's not all on any one person to ensure compliance in any of these programs. It's multiple people, multiple teams, multiple efforts, different clocks and time frames. It's all intricate, but it's all necessary from everybody. And so a question I hear a lot of times, Lisa, and I'm sure you probably experienced this and you can kind of share a little bit about it, but is I've heard people always ask about, like, man, I'm not necessarily scared, but they're having a hard time digesting the ability to make buy-in into compliancy, right? And they're like, I'm learning these requirements, for example, I'm learning these PCI requirements, but I hear a lot that I'm actually going to have, I might meet resistance, as though not everyone is willing to adopt compliancy readily and happily.
Right.
And so there's definitely, it seems like there's another aspect to compliancy that's, you got to have a business hat on at times.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk. It's actually my the takeaways that I have at the end is to talk about that. Is because if you set up your continuous compliance program the right way, it just becomes business as usual. What does Peggy say? Our wireless guy.
He says our wireless guy built that out so fast.
But if you have a continuous compliance program, it's just business as usual. They're not doing anything special. It's what they do every day. We're just asking them, give us the data. So we did a lot. I would say 50%, at least 50% of the evidence we collected ourselves. We didn't ask them anything. They gave us access to their data, and we ran the reports. And we had people on our team that built dashboards, and we monitored it every day. I could go in every day, and if my CISO called me, I could say, we have 50 config failures, right? And it's on these Windows systems, and it's probably because of a change that was done on Sunday night. So it was so much easier to identify what was causing a failure, because we were monitoring it all the time. And it was just Peggy and I. It never changed from the beginning when we first started working together to the end. We didn't have to, we wanted, when they hired me, they said, we're going to give you 9 more people. Yeah, that didn't happen. It was just Peggy and I.
They're like, psych.
Yeah.
Just joking.
Yeah, it was just Peggy and I. And it wasn't that the technology teams get any more people. It was all the same people. It's just, it was caviar dreams and a beer budget. Yeah. So it's just like, you have to be very upfront, and you have to be realistic, and you have to say, listen, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to do it. And this is how long it's going to take. It could take, say you pick one control, right? You say we're going to do something with scope, right? So we're going to pick on scope first.
Daniel here is saying the dynamic duo. I think he's referring to you and Peggy, right?
Yeah. So we pick scope first. Realistically, we say, how long is it going to take us? How long do we think it's going to take us to get scope in a continuous compliance state? Okay. Peggy and I, when we did this for scope, we were handed 3 Excel spreadsheets with assets on them, asset names, IP addresses. Right. That's what we worked off for the first year. And then we ended up putting it into a database ourselves. And then we ended up doing this. But in the end, we ended up getting, so like almost about the time, probably 8 years. It took us to convince somebody that we need these. There's an asset management system at this company. Okay. Every server you buy goes into an inventory.
Right.
It just wasn't identified as being PCI. Right.
Yes.
All kinds of firewalls, but not all of them are in scope for PCI. It's just the six spreadsheets. But anyways, so eventually we convinced them, listen, this tool that you have, this asset management tool you have, can you add fields to it? Yes. Add a field that says PCI.
In scope or not, right?
Yeah. Well, if it's PCI, it's in scope. Add a field that, so we had like, I think 6 fields we had them add to it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So simple, right? So basic, but it's like,
yeah.
I mean, why? Yeah,
from that
that's
point
good.
forward, I'm not saying it fixed everything, but from that point forward, it was so easy because I could go in, I had access to it, I could run a report and say, okay, here, QSA, here's our in-scope assets. The issue we ran into, and I think they will always have it in this organization, and probably others do too, is that when somebody requests a server, they don't necessarily know that it's going to be PCI.
Right.
Right. They don't know it's going to touch something that brings them into scope.
Right.
Right.
So
yeah, like I can remember when I had to, like we brought a new hire on board and had to get a system set up for them. Right. So we had to set up a laptop for them. Right. I can see as you're talking like that, like if I had to send it to, I don't know, like let's just say I had to send it to a marketing person, right? I don't necessarily know that they're going to be touching anything credit card related or anything else. And so I don't know that, hopefully an organization has enough controls in place where they can either set it up pretty well in the beginning, right? Or they have a system in place that allows them to implement any security controls down the line as soon as they find out.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing about most organizations, the organization we work for anyways, they didn't treat servers differently based on whether it was PCI or not. Mm-hmm. Every image they used was the same whether it was PCI or not. Every system image,
which would be okay if it was hardened for.
Correct. It was the hardening. So
cliency.
Hardened was logging turned on? Was this all those hardening?
Yeah, all the password requirements.
Yes.
And
but what happened was Peggy and I really campaigned with the technology teams that we wanted to know, are you bringing in new servers? We don't want to know after you've already ordered them.
Right.
And they've been delivered. We want you to tell us, what are your projects coming up for this year? Mm-hmm. Are you going to be changing out your inventory? Are you going to be adding inventory? What are you doing? So we got in front of it, doing that. And then when the time came for those systems to be ordered and to be delivered, when they were delivered, those teams would say, we have in-scope systems now. So we were able to tag them as being PCI when they came in.
And that makes sense. That makes sense. It helps out because I've been in organizations where, and I've always loved this aspect, when you can have the originating facility for your equipment does that custom imaging for you, right? Mm-hmm. And so it takes, and it's just another aspect to a service provider being able to provide that for your equipment rather than you. Right. I want to rewind just a little bit, Lisa, because I think for some of the people who watch this have some questions sometimes, and a lot of times I always get after the fact, they're like, I didn't know what questions to ask, and here's that, but it made me think of something. So from a team aspect, so I know a lot of our viewers are probably going to be watching this and they're looking and thinking, trying to either make the decision to get into PCI compliancy as a new career for themselves, mm-hmm. or they're in there and they're wanting to edify themselves by watching this, right? So from someone who is learning and wants to get into this field, I think it would be cool if you could highlight a little bit of the practical, like, what does it look like? Because I think at points while you were talking, I felt like there was a much larger team than just you and Peggy at times, But then I also remind myself that it did start just with Peggy, I think, right? And then you were brought in later.
Yeah.
And so, but then it stayed just the two of you.
Right.
And so from just, I guess, a team aspect, because when you say something like that, that sparks me, Lisa. Like, I'm like, that's what I want. I want to go to a place. I want to start from scratch. I want to build it out. I don't know why I'm looking for that. Me too, Janae? Okay.
Yes. It sounds crazy, but like, I want to be there to like see it through. Yeah.
I'm with you. And I know that's asking for punishment, but I do want to see it from the start. And if I can leave it in someone's hands and then, do it again somewhere else, that would be fantastic. So can you just help us understand like the team aspect, like not so much the PCI piece, but the actual, what would we say? How would you say that?
Well, anybody involved in the PCI environment from those teams, like the technology teams and all of those. So I mean, when I first, and I'm sure Peggy was the same way, when we first started, we were, oh no, it's the PCI people. It was
that's what I heard is people do not like you.
What are they going to do? In the beginning, when I was looking at it, like I didn't really know the DSS at all when I started. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I was reading the DSS, and I'm like, that's Peggy's job. Peggy's job is to do the DSS stuff. I just need to figure out what does she need from these technology people and what's the best way for me to get that to her. Because I was feeding Peggy, right? My compliance sustainability program, the continuous compliance, was feeding Peggy's rock, right? So in the beginning, it was, hey, Mr. Firewall guy, why are you doing this? I kind of went at it really like aggressive, and they didn't like that at all.
Peggy says, people ran away from me if they saw me in the hallway.
Mm-hmm. And then I realized that I'm also not the type of person that's going to be like, I'm just not that type of, I'm just not that type of person that will hold your hand and say, oh, you're doing the best thing you can do,
I'm a hand holder.
I'm not a hand holder. So for me, it was really, I personally, because like I said, I had the IT background, so I knew, what I was going after when I went at them. I had to figure out what was the best way to get them to realize the importance of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like your, the config settings and, doing all this dashboarding and stuff. So it was really, really what Janae said. You have to tell them how it's going to help them. Mm-hmm. How am I going to help you? That's what I would say to them after I get over my initial frustration not being able to get them to answer an email. Right. It was, how can I help you? Every year we need to have this. The firewall team has to have this. The config team has to have this. I know you have it because your tools are the ones who you're scanning for you. So you're getting that data. So what can I do to help you? Give me that. What do you need from me? Yeah. How can we make it better? And so the standing up of the compliance, continuous compliance was a big driver for that, because they knew, okay, it's going to be my day-to-day business. We talked about this is nothing. We're not adding anything new. Right. This is what you do every day. This is, your run book tells you, I do this, this, this. Oh, I'm at this part. I have to get evidence and I have to submit it to Lisa. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. We weren't asking them to monitor things. We weren't asking, we were, like I said, 50% of the stuff we were collecting ourselves. Just give us the data. So we were trying to make things easier for them.
Right.
So I think that's the way that you have to go about it. You have to, because you're a team. We're not gonna get anything, and they're not gonna pass if we don't all work together. So right. It's like a kumbaya moment. It's not like we're all, oh yeah, this is great. It was a lot of hard work, and it was, at the end, we still had people that just didn't want to they didn't want to be part of it. They thought that their way was the best way. We'll just keep
Yeah.
So that we still had six at the end, but we had our program set up, and I tell you, that the last 2 years that we were there, it was slick. It was pretty easy. I mean, and I talk about that when we get going on the whole framework part of it, because there's so much that you can do as far as getting the engine running, get them doing their day-to-day business activities. And then you can say, okay, you're giving me this, and let's automate that. So you don't even give that to me anymore. It goes into a SIM or another, someplace else, or it feeds another tool that runs a dashboard for us, and we do it for you. So
I have a question. If, say, I wanted to get into the role of being that person that would come into an organization and create the compliancy program for them, would I need to set up my program and have everything in line before I was to go and do that? Or would I wait and get to know the corporation and then build that based off of them? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so what we ended up doing was, in the beginning, we didn't, like I said, I didn't know anything about PCI when I started doing it. So my focus was really on figuring out what are the processes, right? So I interviewed every team. We did process workflows, the whole thing. I can give you thousands and thousands of reams of documentation that we created the first year, getting everybody, so that I knew exactly what the process was for the config team. I could tell you, okay, they do this, they do this, they do this, do this, and we get evidence here, and then a ticket gets cut here for a failure, blah, blah, blah. And so that was what we focused on the first year. And so that's what I would recommend anybody, especially if you're not, if you don't have a strong IT background and you don't know what some of these technology teams are already doing, you definitely need to have that. Having said that, only do that for the first year. Only have it be for your starting up of the program, because it's impossible to maintain documentation, because everything changes, processes change, technology changes, and we just couldn't keep up with changing all those diagrams and stuff to show all that.
Right.
That's when we introduced the run books, because the run books basically were those process documents that we had created in the beginning, only they didn't contain the Visio diagrams. It was just the step-by-step procedures that they followed. And
then it takes that off your plate and puts that onto the individual business units' plates.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Because all of those diagrams, I had to maintain them after we created them.
Right.
So anytime that they changed a technology or brought a new one in, and we had to change, it was a nightmare trying to keep it updated.
Right.
The other thing too is that you have to be really careful that because you could have, when you're doing one of those process flows in the beginning, you could have like 6 people sitting in the room. They all need to be there because they're all involved in the end process. But you got to make sure that they're telling you the truth, not that they would be lying, just that they may not know what's important for you to understand.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the numbers game. Like, so in one of my previous positions, my director would look at our reports, and he'd look at those numbers, and then, like anyone, would just have this knee-jerk reaction, and decisions would just start flying out like you're on Oprah's birthday show, right? And, then I found a very magical group that was generous with helping understand those numbers, and taught me a valuable lesson in how you don't make decisions based on numbers. You look at those numbers to help you ask questions to build a story behind it.
That's good.
And so it's kind of the same thing. Like when I heard you saying that, it's like, okay, they may not know what we need to know. They may think they're giving us enough, and they may feel like they're like, this is all you need. Here you go. Here's 100 computer lists, and that's it. but it's
Right.
like there's more to the story from a compliance standpoint. We have to build, that eventually gets us to those marks and the boxes that we check off or not. But we need to understand everything to it. Like you said, it does go back to the idea, not the idea, but that these are assessments and not audits.
Right.
So I like that. Gosh, I had this question forming, Lisa, that was about when, I guess what I'm thinking is, I'm not sure how to say it, but is it likely, are you seeing organizations bringing in new blood into the field, or is a lot of recycling of old companies, organizations? I'm not sure how to ask that, how to refine that question better. Make it sound like,
as far as like somebody for running a PCI program.
Yeah, like, are you seeing organizations adopting that didn't have?
Well, I see all the time that organizations are putting out jobs on Indeed and in LinkedIn and everything, looking for compliance analysts, but they're not bringing them in to do what I'm talking about. They're bringing them in to do an audit. You know what I mean? They're coming in, we need you to make sure that they give you the evidence and you check off the box. That's what they're doing. So that's not continuous compliance. That's not assuring, that's not maturing your compliance program. That's not making sure that you can, if an auditor, say all of a sudden PCI said, you're going to do a ROC every quarter.
Right.
You'd never pass. And so the continuous compliance program really isn't about making sure a sample is compliant. Your whole environment is compliant.
Exactly.
So you don't have to worry about when they come in and they say, give me your inventory. Hey, take it. You know what? We didn't even give them evidence for a sample. We gave them everything. Here's all of our in-scope asset evidence. Here it is. We don't have to just slice and dice it. It's all compliant. And if we have a config failure, here is the project and the project code and when it's going to be done. And it'll be done within the risk. Yeah, and so the runbooks are key, and they are. So
Peggy also said, most organizations don't know who or what they need. Job descriptions are all over the place.
Right.
That's just,
because so they're saying, like I see a lot of job descriptions that say, or job postings that say, oh, you got to be, you have to have your CISA, you have to have your.
Right.
I wasn't an ISA. Peggy was the ISA. How many ISAs do you need? You only need one. It's actually the better way to do it. If you have somebody who's an ISA like Peggy, and she's the only one focused on that, and she's dealing with the bank, the QSA, the CISO, that's great. Then you have people that run the continuous compliance program. And for me, it was just me, but that some organizations could have, other people that are doing it.
So what I feel, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Because the continuous compliance program, we stood up, we would collect evidence, monitor it continuously. So we did in the end of it, towards the end, config was scanning once a week. They weren't scanning at quarter. They weren't scanning at a month.
Right.
They were scanning weekly. I could come in any day and say, what assets are failing a specific setting. Logs, you look at logs are supposed to be collected every single day.
Yeah.
Right? We wrote queries, Peggy and I did, and put them into the SIM that would feed us a report that showed us to make sure that all of our assets had those log settings on them. I mean, so that's why I say 50% of the work we were doing it ourselves. We had built the scripts. We were collecting, information on the logs, and we were watching that. The log team didn't have to do that. The log team just had to make sure that they kept the logs, the servers up and logging, making sure that the logs were actually happening. Because you can't go a day without a log. If you have a server that's not logging today, you're in hot water.
Yeah. Lisa, do you think that we have a good chance of finding somewhere to interview with and being able to sell them pre-hire on a continuous compliancy situation that they didn't know they needed, but that we could be the right people for them? Is
Yeah,
that possible? Is that
like I said, I'm going to go to it because I don't want to run out of time. But my
yeah,
takeaway,
I've lost track of time. Everyone, if you're hanging out with us, thank you. I just want to say thank you, Lisa. So long as you're willing to talk, we're willing to host. Okay.
we can have another whole call where we talk about nothing but the framework, because the framework is like,
Yeah, and I would appreciate that, actually. So if you're available next week, we can dedicate that time to it. Because I don't want you to rush over it either, if that makes sense. I definitely want time to go through it, because I think there is, if it's related to what you were showing me earlier, I think that's gold, honestly.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people.
Like I said, I have it already, so I can. It's not an issue if I can do it again next week. So I guess the takeaway for this, and we called it a call to action, is the first thing you need to do is you need to take a good hard look at your current program. Really look at it. Okay. Can you honestly say that your environment is continuously compliant? Okay. Mm-hmm. How long after the assessment can you remain compliant? Right. Like, is it a week, 2 weeks, a month? How long? Really, and I'm not trying to,
one day.
I'm not trying to put anybody down. I'm just saying.
Well, yeah, it's just, you have to be honest with yourself first of all.
And it goes back to integrity.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, this isn't a feelings thing. I'm not trying to bash on people. It's really just a to be compliant or not to be.
Yeah. So if you're completing a SAC every year and you're sending the SAC to someone else to check off the boxes and then send it back to you, are you actually collecting and assessing evidence? Mm-hmm. Probably not.
Mm-hmm. Probably not.
Leaving that up to somebody else. And should you be leaving that up to somebody else? Are you thinking, well, I'm only on the hook for the SAC once a year, and this is overkill. Using a continuous compliance program and we only require to have a SAC is overkill. Okay. But if you're a level 2 merchant and you're getting close to dripping over into level 1, you are so screwed. If you're anywhere near this, you are screwed.
Yeah, so, that going from any SAC to the Rock is
without having some type of a continuous program in place, you just
the guy on the help desk isn't going to be able to do that on his own.
So then the next question I have, no, it's not really a question. It's I'm pleading with people. Please put aside the mentality of, but this is always the way we've done it.
This is how you do it. Mm-hmm.
2.3 seconds.
Because if you think your current program is a cakewalk every year, I bet it's not. You couldn't convince me that you have an assessment every year that's just a cakewalk. If you do, then you're not doing it right.
Yeah,
right.
You're doing it right.
Right.
I can't tell you how much encouragement I'm getting right now from you, Lisa, to be honest, because I feel like I love in the interview or in trying to get that buy-in. I love having the kind of information that you're sharing, and Peggy has shared too. It's all about, it's like, yeah, these things are difficult. These things are hard. I know this. Sounds like you don't. Let me help you out there, Yeah.
And when was the last time you actually had an assessment, did an assessment without some type of a hiccup or some type of, heads were exploding because something happened?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like any project, right?
Yeah.
When was the last time you had a project that met its financial goals?
Yeah, all of these things, all of these headaches, all of the nagging, all that chaos should happen during a project, not your program. Your program should be a fine-tuned machine running, every day. It's just business as usual.
Exactly. Yes.
And so the last one I had was, don't be afraid that you won't get buy-in from senior leaders. Okay. Because what you need to do, like I said, is really think about your current program. What's wrong with it? Don't be afraid to highlight what's wrong. Bring it out in the open. Be transparent,
Yeah.
And then you bite off one issue at a time. So pick
Like,
your
I'm in
worst,
here for the long haul.
yeah. Pick your worst control, identify the issues and what you think needs to be done to get the control into a state of continuous compliance. Because we just talked about what continuous compliance is. It's every day you are doing things every day for the process to flow and for you to assess it and move on. If you look at it today and it's passing, you move on to the next day. So on to another day. Communicate your intentions and, like I said, be realistic. You have to be realistic. Okay, who needs to be involved and how long? Because I think that's the hardest part with senior leaders is that if you go to them, first off, you have to say, this is our issue with our program, right? Yes. Our program today, we are compliant for 2.3 seconds. That's it, right? We're compliant for 2.3 seconds, but we need to mature our program, and this is what we need to do, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to start with scope, and then we're going to do whatever your next worst one is. Make a list. And on all of those controls, write it right down. There's a list. This is what's wrong with scope. This is what's wrong with config. This is what's wrong with vulnerability. And rank them based on your risk assessment of your environment. Which one is posing the most risk? Okay. Because you already have technology people doing this. People are already working the systems. This is their day-to-day job. So it's not that you need more resources. Okay.
True. Good point.
Yeah. And so my last thing is what? That's what you need to, your homework for tonight. What is your worst control out of them all? We had 5 key controls that we focused on the most. It was config, vuln, logging, scope, and firewalls. And that was 5. We had 5. That was those 5. All the other ones, they weren't a big deal. They weren't having problems. The 5 that I just said are the ones you're going to have the most problems with. And that's why they're the ones that have the frequencies. Vuln has your ASV scans, your vuln scans, your pen testing, all of that. Config has, FIM has, the control settings that fail all the time. It has your OSs and how they're built and how they're maintained, so I can go on and on and on. So those were our 5 that we kind of like draped the framework around.
That makes sense
for them.
So when you got hired, I know you worked for the company for a while, but when you got this position, were they hiring for a continuous compliance person in, I guess, was that the role that you applied for, or was it something along those lines and it turned into you?
I didn't apply for the job.
Okay.
You got voluntold for the job.
Yeah. They actually hired, I'm sure people have heard PwC.
No.
And they hired PwC to come in and stand up the program. And so they started in with the interviews. And I don't think they were there very long. And then I was at at another office doing training for something else. Because at the time I was a change manager. And the guy who was the director of the compliance group said, hey, he goes, I got a job for you. I want you to come do. And I said, what is it? And he said,
you're a champion for change, right? I've always been a champion. Well, let me take that back. I learned to become a champion of change, that you had not to fight it. You must just go with it.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. And my team used to hate me for that, because when there was a new thing coming out, I'd be like, oh, we're signing up for it first here. I'd be like, why? I'd be like, I'd rather help influence that change and be the early adopter who helps everyone else later, rather than being the one at the end of the train that has to follow everything and gets no say in the input or anything like that. So.
Well, what's interesting was one of the reasons why he asked me was because, when I interviewed with the director before they gave me the job, the director said to me, you can't take no for an answer. If you ask somebody for something and they say no, and you let them say no, he goes, I'll fire you.
Oh.
And he said, because I know based on what people have told me is you're not the type of person to back down. That's why I'm hiring you. So they needed somebody in there. Like I said, I wasn't a hand holder. So when I first went in there, I was guns blazing, and
That's interesting.
Peggy's here saying you'll see those same key controls as the most problematic in the Verizon Payment Security Report.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa, I appreciate you coming on tonight, and I appreciate you hanging out with us longer than originally scheduled, and everyone else out there as well. I would love to invite you back next week if you have time. I want to get through the there's a slide, guys, that I don't even see here, and Lisa was going to talk about tonight, and because we just asked her too many questions and went on other stuff, we didn't get to it. But that's not to say it's a bad thing. So I hope we can find some time in your schedule next week, Lisa, to come back, join us again for part 2 and share some more information. Everyone, feel free to type out your questions or anything else in the comments. But right now, what we want to do is we're going to give Lisa some time on the screen by herself so that she can share any message that she wants to, whether it be her favorite chocolate chip cookie or where you can find her at saving the world one person at a time kind of situation.
Check out their website.
Yeah. So I just do have one thing to say about the icebreaker at the beginning. I love watermelon, and I spent a lot of money on a juicer so I could juice watermelon. But when I did that this past weekend, I ate more watermelon than I juiced. So that didn't work. So anyway, but I don't think I can do watermelon with milk or cream in it. I just don't think I can do it. But anyways, I'm so glad you guys had me here to chat about continuous compliance. And truly, our whole conversation this last hour and 15 minutes has been about continuous compliance. And I'd love to come back next week to talk about the actual framework for standing up a program. But the long story short, Peggy and I spent 10 years struggling, learning, and improving the PCI compliance program. We went through all the struggles you guys are going through. We racked our brains, trying to figure out how we could make it better. So when we decided that we were going to leave corporate life and start a business, we both agreed that our mission was to share our knowledge with our peers in hopes that it helps and provides some relief for everybody who is still doing the work in the corporate environment. So my main focus for the first year was creating a project management tool we call Polaris PCA. So basically, it is a project management tool and people are probably familiar with Jira, Asana, those types of project management tools. But the tool is built out with all of our knowledge base in it. It's got insightful experience, industry best practices, and it literally will help you run your program, your assessment every year. Even if it's just a SAC, we have it designed for a SAC as well. So and on top of all that, on the excellent knowledge base and everything else that we've put into it, it's built on one of the industry best workflow management platforms called ClickUp. So that you can find out more information about that out on our website. And then, as Peggy had mentioned in the past, we have a resource center that we've been, working hard, trying to get as much of what's in our head onto paper and out into the resource center. It's got workshops, courses, guidebooks, checklists, quick tips. It's got everything in it. All those things that will help you navigate the ins and outs of PCI DSS. And today, I think it was around lunchtime, Peggy uploaded our newest course called How to Implement Continuous PCI Compliance with a PCI Sustainability Framework That Really Works. So go out to our website, take a look at what we have to offer. Let us know if you want to set up an appointment to spend time talking to us. And we're hoping we can help. We're helping you manage your assessments and complete them easier, more effectively, and efficiently. And I thank you again.
Thank you so much for that, Lisa. Everyone, we put the Payment Card Assessments website in the chat on YouTube. If you find this on LinkedIn, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, I think I tagged Lisa's name somewhere in the comments. So you can click on her name and you'll see the Payment Card Assessments website off onto the side of her in her About section there. But yeah, definitely give it a check out and see and report back. Let us know how you liked it.
Yeah.
Yes, Marsha. Marsha, am I saying your name correctly? I feel like I am, but please tell me if I'm not. We will post when our next video will be. Lisa, thank you for hanging out with us tonight. I'm going to put you in the green room until we're done, but just hang out there until we get done, and we'll come back in and talk with you after the show's done for just a few minutes, okay?
All right. Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you again. Awesome, Janae.
Love it.
Awesome. Yeah, there's so much gold here. Like, I think really for me, it gives me hope because I feel like after today, I have a lot more control over what I want to do. And you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the old adage of just kind of going out hunting for a job somewhere, applying for it, and, you know, I want to do that job. It's kind of like, that's a nice segue to get in there to kind of talk about, let me, you know, this whole continuous compliance. Let me help you with that. That's your real problem, not this job that you put out there that you think you need.
Exactly. And
that's how I feel.
It opens your eyes to, there's so many different avenues within PCI. There's not just the QSA or ISA. There's other ways that you can help impact. And yeah, I'm about it. I'm excited.
Okay. Same here. So everyone, we appreciate you hanging out with us tonight, and be on the lookout for the YouTube channel and the link, my personal LinkedIn. Those are where you'll find this primarily going where we go live. And so you'll see again for next week, whenever we post it up, it'll be on the YouTube or my personal LinkedIn, and you can click on the little follow or remind or notify me button that's on either of those. And that way it'll alert you. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great evening. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Say bye-bye.
Bye.